Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is the Merced Subbasin GSA's Phase 2 fee workshop. This is the second of three public workshops that the GSA is going to be holding on this Phase 2, what we call the Phase 2 fee. We're also recording this workshop and it's being broadcast over Zoom as a webinar. And so we've got a handful of folks online who are also listening in, and they'll have an opportunity to, I think, ask their questions via a ask question and type questions in mechanism online. And then we've got a handful of folks here in the room, and I really appreciate all of you coming. My name is Lacey McBride. I'm the Water Resources Manager for Merced County, and I also provide support to the Merced Subbasin GSA. I'm not sure if everybody's totally familiar with the GSA, so I just wanted to give a little bit of background on the GSA and the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. We use a lot of acronyms. Before we jump into the workshop on the Phase 2 fee and the slides on the fee, before I start, I just want to introduce in the room, we have Greg Young with Zanjero, who's supporting the GSA, Adriel Ramirez with Zanjero, and in the back of the room, we have Danielle Betancourt with Merced County. So the Merced Subbasin GSA was formed back in 2017, and they were formed as a mandate under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, which was legislation passed by the state requiring groundwater basins across the state that are of a medium and high priority to be managed sustainably, which means the groundwater flowing into the basin balances with the groundwater that's being extracted outside of the basin. And so in order to do that, the Merced Subbasin GSA has been working on several different policies and programs that they've been putting into place kind of in a stepwise process. There was a Phase 1 of GSP groundwater sustainability plan implementation, and now we're looking at Phase 2 implementation. Phase 1 was a lot of voluntary reduction of groundwater use. It included a land repurposing program that was locally funded. It included efforts to bring more surface water into the GSA to replace groundwater use. Phase 2, which started just this year, January 1st, 2026, includes the groundwater allocation. And so if you've all if you're property owners, you may have already logged into the groundwater accounting platform. And if not, you may have received a water use statement that is from the GSA showing you your 2025 groundwater use. And that is all in preparation to give you as much information as we can about groundwater use and managing under this allocation rule moving forward. We're going to talk about the fee today. And I just wanted to mention there are a couple of existing fees that the GSA has. One is going away and being replaced by this one. But in 2019, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency approved a SGMA landowner compliance fee. And so that was approved in 2019 and is still in place. That was for just real basic administration of the GSA, filling out the annual reports, completing the groundwater sustainability plan. That shows up on your property tax bill unless you're in certain water districts. If you're in La Grande Affluent Water District, or if you're a part of the Sandy Mush Mutual Water Company or the Lone Tree Mutual Water Company, those agencies actually collect fees from you and they pay that 2019 fee on your behalf. If you're not in one of those water districts, then that fee, you see it on your property tax bill. In 2022, the GSA approved a Phase 1 fee, and this funded that local land repurposing program that I talked about. And it had a few other activities that it also funded, like some domestic well mitigation and an executive director, a water rights application. And that fee was for 4 years and it sunsets this year. And so the collection of that fee that you'll see on your property tax bill is the last time that you will see that fee. And in order to move forward, the GSA had to come up with a different funding mechanism, a different fee to replace the phase one fee, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I just wanted to note, I've mentioned the groundwater sustainability plan a couple times. So the groundwater sustainability plan is really the big master plan that the GSA has with the neighboring GSAs in this Merced Basin on how they're going to manage groundwater going forward and how we will achieve sustainability by 2040. They drafted this plan in 2020. It was considered incomplete by the state in 2022, and we resubmitted it, and we actually received an approval of this plan in 2023. In July of 2023, I believe we received the approval of that plan. So we do have an approved groundwater sustainability plan, which is really good news for the Merced Basin. If you've been watching any of the Sigma news across the San Joaquin Valley, there are other basins that are not in quite the same place as we are. And so now I think I'm going to pass it over to Greg Young, who's going to walk through some slides, and then we'll have time for discussion about the slides and question and answers.
Thank you, Lacey. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's important to also say, after we do all this phase two discussion, if anybody wants to hang around later and ask questions broadly about allocation or the groundwater accounting platform, we can be here to help out with that stuff too. So if there are questions not related to the fee study, hold them off and then we'll talk about them at the end. All right, so we're going to go through several slides here. I'm going to orient myself to be at the right. Sorry, click. Come on. There we go. All right, get the next slide up. So we're going to talk through these discussion items, and I'm going to stay here in front of the podium because the web folks need this view, and our microphone for them is only right here. So we'll stay right here. We're going to talk today about the purpose of the fee, the Proposition 218 requirements, which is a state regulation statute that was passed that governs the fee structures. What happens under a potential state intervention? Let's go through the engineer's report itself, the phase two engineer's report outline, the funding mechanism categories. There are 3 of them that we'll talk through. Who is eligible to pay, or the eligible parcels that will be paying and funding that. And then look at the proposed budget, estimated maximum annual charges based on current eligible acres. And then also talk about the historic fees charged per acre, as Lacey just talked about with the other 2 existing fees, and see how this board has been handling that annual decision on budgeting. And then also discuss the anticipated distribution of the phase 2 funding categories over time. This is not a sunsetting category or fee. This will be continuing into the foreseeable future to help fund the GSA and operate. So its foundational purposes are to help make the GSA operate. So I think we're moving. So what's the engineer's report about? It's going to describe the proposed functions and activities that the GSA intends to implement, describe the proposed total revenue needed and likely annual charges to fund those proposed functions and activities, provides a supporting analysis used to develop the proposed budget, including identified implementation needs and representative cost benchmarks. So in other words, what's the supporting evidence for why dollar amounts are what they are? And we'll look at those dollar amounts in a moment. Identify the parcels that will be subject to the phase 2 fee, and then discuss the compliance with Prop 218 requirements and also Assembly Bill 2257, which is a newer opportunity through the 218 process, which allows for workshops like this and more interaction as a process. So what are the Proposition 218 requirements? So Proposition 218 is a statewide proposition passed many years ago discussing fees and the implementation of fees. So all public agencies, if they're going to be imposing fees, are subject to these requirements, and they need to go through a process. There's a couple of different ways you can look for this. In this case, this will be a process that allows the majority to veto the fee. If the majority of parcel owners that are subject to the fee vote no, the board cannot consider adopting the fee. If there is not a veto vote, then the board can consider adopting the fee and setting the fee then each year at where it wants, but no more than the maximum that's set up. So the way this sets up is we are putting forward the basis for the fee and the charge, and that it can't be used for any other purposes than what that fee or charge is imposed, which in this case is to implement the functionality of the GSA. And no fee or charge may be imposed for general governmental services. So you can read a lot of, I don't need to read every piece here, but this is what the statutory requirements address. We did want to touch on this because this starts to become really important. The state intervention alternative, who follows Sigma, especially down the valley, maybe Kern area, Kings, Tulare, Thule. You see newspaper articles about state intervention and probation and lawsuits and all this. The state has not accepted their GSPs. Merced hasn't accepted one. As a result, they've come in and started layering on their jurisdiction. They've brought into probation, and with that come fees. So if we are not successful at any point in time in continuing to meet the requirements of Sigma, then we potentially could be brought in front, this whole basin could be brought in front of the board, in front of the state, which ultimately could go to the State Water Resource Control Board, to intervene and administer a groundwater management plan. In other words, Sacramento would say, here's what I think is best for Merced, not what you guys develop locally. The state imposed requirements include annual reporting and fees, which includes $300 per well and up to $35 per acre foot pumped. That's a state imposed fee. So if this GSA fails and this basin is brought into probation or any kind of action and intervention by the state, these fees are going to be applied by the state. And you're going to be writing a check to the state. When you look at the little side call out box, there's an example of what this starts to look like. And let me make this last point on this last bullet. Absent the fee that we're discussing today, the GSA wouldn't be able to implement the programs and the activities that we are needing to achieve that sustainability. And then therefore we increase the risk of intervention. If we do go into intervention, here's an example. If you had 100 acres of almonds and you had 2 wells, the state may also come in and say your sustainable yield number and any other ways you're looking at allocation, we may just cap it. So in this example, they've capped it at 1 foot per acre you're allowed. Well, that's not really enough to grow almonds, but they don't care. They're going to charge you 1 acre foot times 2 wells. So you can see the math here, and it comes out to roughly $40 an acre charges.
Has any subbasins gone to the state?
Yes. So Kings subbasin, Thule subbasin, they've been, they're actually, there's a website where you can make your payment to the state that's been set up.
So we vote the locals out, state comes in, that's what you're.
Correct.
51% majority, and we don't have to pay anything except the state steps in and we have to deal with those.
And you'll have to deal with this, and we don't know how they want to manage. They are less understanding, and they're more like, you know what, we don't even going to talk about an APA, an additional pumping allowance and ramp downs. We're just going to impose what we think is correct. And that could be, that takes away a lot of local control. We are in this basin with 2 other GSAs, the Merced Irrigation and Urban GSA, which include the cities and Merced Irrigation District, and then Turner Island GSA. So they could come in and say, your basin is failing because this GSA is not getting its job done. That brings everybody into play there. How the state handles that, they may say it's all on our shoulders, and they use what's called a good actor clause for MID, possibly. And then you're in a position of, we're taking on even more of the burden and more of the restrictions as our GSA. So if we are unable to achieve success with what's in the groundwater sustainability plan for our GSA, we start to risk all this state intervention, which brings with it a bunch of these unknowns and likely higher costs. Keep that $40 in mind, because the fee we're discussing today has a max that's less than that. In fact, it's less than half of that. So it's important to keep in mind in context. So the phase 2 engineers report. So Proposition 218 says you need to prepare an engineers report to discuss the funding and the fee mechanism. So this is the outline of the report. The report is available online at the MSGSA website right now. You can go grab it, download it, look at it, read it. it includes these sections: an introduction, a discussion about the Merced subbase and GSA, the proposed functions and activities to be funded, which we'll talk about in several more slides here under these three categories. Section 4 is the determination of benefits. Section 5 is the proposed charge. And then there's an appendix that lists every APN, every parcel APN that is an eligible parcel that would be one of the parcels receiving this fee. So you can go look at that APN, and if your number, your parcel is on there, that means you're granted an allocation under the GSA's operations. And that means that you are subject to these fees. If your name is not on there and you are growing, then we need to get you added because you've somehow been misclassified or something else. And there are provisions that the GSA has addressed for that. So we can talk about those issues later. So Appendix A lists everybody, and we'll see a map here, but the map you can't tell, is my parcel on there? Because it's, you know, a big area map on a small screen. So the list is important. So what are the phase 2 funding mechanism categories? So the first category is administrative and governance functions, and it would include these types of activities. And these are the activities that are represented that are used as a cost basis. And these, then all these activities and their cost basis are lumped together for one category 1 subtotal. That subtotal that's would be the maximum annual budget that could be obtained or charged by the GSA board and collected under this category. The monies in this category can't be used to fund activities in the other two categories, and vice versa. Those other categories can't be used to fund this. So each one of these is like a unique bucket of dollars for the functions that we see here, set as an annual max. And each year the board will determine, do I need that annual max or do I need something less than that annual max based on the conditions, what the accounts are looking like, where's the status. And we'll talk about that later on some other slides. So in this one, we have executive director and technical support. The dollars that we'll see here on the next slide for these different categories, for these positions, this includes salary, benefits, employment taxes, you know, your health benefits, and you have the whole cadre of things are in here, plus some room if needed to try and attract the people that we may want in order to function as an executive director. Currently, there is no executive director in this GSA. The county, through Lacey, is doing most of that work, but she is a county employee. She is not a GSA employee. And so she has other hats that she's trying to do. The GSA office space, so the intent is to have a location that is self-contained and is not borrowing some space from the county. There's also an element for future regulatory and legal compliance reserves. The state has been talking about more subsidence issues and concerns, and they may place more subsidence monitoring or other requirements on the GSAs to evaluate and to perform each year. So there's potential additional costs that the GSA will have to do in order to stay compliant with SGMA. And recognize, I think you said the dates. SGMA right now says you have between now, when we adopted the plan, and 2040 to get to sustainability. And then you have to maintain that for the next 50 years. So that's what SGMA talks about, at least 70 years into the future. So when we're talking about these things, there's some unknowns that are out there. So there's a bucket that allows the GSA to have some dollars if there's some unknowns from the state. So then we have some potential grant writing. Should be great. If we can pay somebody to get grants, that reduces the charges to everybody in the basin because we're using state or federal dollars. So those may come into play some years, they may not, depending on how grants are laying out. Website maintenance, and then the groundwater accounting platform subscription, customization, and support. By show of hands, who's on the groundwater accounting platform? Everybody knows the groundwater accounting platform and has been on it at some point. If you haven't, please see Adriel after this meeting, because let's make sure. And I know some of you were on a workshop we did in this room. You guys were there, I recognize you. Groundwater accounting platform, we got you all signed up at that meeting and everything. That is where you're going to be understanding how you continue to, how you're working with your allocation, and that's interface between the GSA and the growers.
I got a question though. If we got to pay the money on our property taxes, how come the county doesn't help us? That's a part of it. The money's going to the county.
If they don't want to give you an office or anything, what the heck's else?
The county is, we're using their, and Lacey can explain this further. We're using them as basically a treasury. So they are the banker for us, but then they give the money over to the GSA, who then administers it and operates it. They charge costs. They charge a fee to this GSA to have those services and to do those things, including to have Lacey involved. She is not free to this GSA.
Yeah, no, I get that, but yeah, that's okay.
Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Still,
Okay.
it's kind of a gray area that doesn't really make sense.
So if we also look at it, this GSA, we'll see in a map in a minute if it's not clear. The county covers a lot more than this Merced subbasin and also this Merced subbasin GSA. While it's got that Merced in the name, is not the entirety of the county. So if the county is doing something and you're like an MID grower or you're the other side of the river out on the west side of the county, why is my tax dollar going to fund something at the county, right? So there's that element that they are considering.
Yeah, and that goes back to the subsidence. We don't have subsidence out there in the Grand Plains, pretty hot area, but I mean, go across 152, there's terrible. So
We got all sorts of issues.
with us,
We got all sorts of issues all over the place, and part of how this whole allocation has been why we have sustainability zones. Well, we can talk about that later.
all right.
So here are the numbers. Max annual budget, 1.2 million. And I'll give away a little ending here. We're under $3 million annual operating budget as a max for a GSA. If you think of that of context, there is no irrigation district in place, and you're trying to stand up an irrigation district. You're trying to stand up something and operate it on a budget of about $2.5 million a year. So just kind of think of it in that context. If you're in MID, a grower in MID, or in any other district, you're paying kind of just fees for standby fee, not necessarily standby, but fees to just be part of the district, as well as fees for water and other things. So in that context, I just want to keep that all in mind here. So we have this category with 1.25. Yes, sir.
Are these fees going into the general fund or are they earmarked specifically for?
So these funds that would be collected. Sorry, I'll repeat the question. Thank you. The question is, do these go into a general fund or are they available for just these activities? Is that correct? So the way this is set up, category 1 has these activities at 1.25 max annual budget.
Right now, our property tax fund, now, that's going into the general fund.
No, it is an earmarked. So the question again, sorry, I'm gonna have to remind myself. The question was the current fees being paid on the property tax. Where is that dollar going? Is it going into the county general fund? No, it is earmarked to the GSA, and the county hands the money over to the GSA based on those collections. We're just using their mechanism to collect and their mechanism to lien if we need it, if people are not paying. But the money is not commingled with any of the other county dollars in any way. I got the okay from Lacey, so that means I got that one right. Ben, please.
Greg, so I'll be a little slow. The $41 an acre for the 100-acre block you previously talked about. I'm looking at you guys' rule here and I see $500 an acre foot plus $1,000 if you don't comply, and plus $100 an additional day after that. So walk me through the mentality of how is it better for the state not to take control, that they take control, we take $41 an acre foot versus your guys' rule is $500 an acre.
So the section you're looking at in this, I got to repeat the question. You may end that with, hey, and repeat my question, please. That'll be my reminder. So the question was for those on the web, as in the rules, there's in the enforcement section of the rule, it talks about penalties that can be charged when you are out of compliance with the allocation rule. So if you are violating the rule, the GSA can implement a charge of up to $500 and then a certain value per acre foot, right? Whatever you just read, there's a variety. It's in section 4131, 4.1.3.1 of the allocation rule. That is a penalty rule. So if you are out of compliance with the allocation, the GSA can impose that penalty. The intent is nobody is out of compliance. Wow, I almost said no one is in compliance. That would be bad. Nobody is out of compliance. Therefore, there is $0 that come in there. That is a penalty fee only. You cannot anticipate operating on any of that because if everybody is working within their allocations, no penalty is imposed.
Well, I hear you, but what I'm saying is the penalty imposed by the stage $41.
That's an annual thing, and they may, question was, the penalty by the state is was estimated there as $41. They may also come in and say, you can't pump more than an acre foot. Oh, I see you pump more than an acre foot. I'm shutting off your well. They have all sorts of other authorities that they can impose that essentially if you think of that $500, if you violate, hopefully you don't violate, so you'd never have that. Now you're looking at these charges versus a state charge that would be there every year if they allow you to pump. And there are a lot of questions. If you follow any of the news down the valley further, there are a lot of challenges going on where people are having some significant impacts and significant changes to activities and amount of water being pumped. There's like some places have 3 inches of native yield being made available down in Kern, Bakersfield area. So it's pretty significant. If you're not in a district, you're hosed. Hosed is a technical term.
Everybody except their state, right?
So sorry, I got my smack in the side of the head. The question was, if everybody uses up their bucket of water in the current allocation rule in a there's a 5-year allocation made available to you. If you use that all up in 2 years, you now will continue to just get 13 inches available subsequent years, which is the sustainable yield. So you can just keep using that. That's going to likely change your operation. So the reason for the 5-year bucket, and we're getting outside the phase 2 discussion here, so I want to pull us back. The reason for that bucket is to give people time to change, time to adapt, time to undertake different operational practices and not continue to grow at a overdrafted circumstance. If they continue to grow overdrafting, they're going to start seeing the penalties. And the GSA also has the authority to shut you off at some point if it needs to. So, I mean, it's not awesome, but the problem is our groundwater levels have been going down and declining, and the state says, fix that, or we'll fix it for you. We're trying to have self-imposed rules to manage that fix. If we're unable to, we'll have to face that question and see how we adjust from there. Yeah, so hopefully we don't get to that point, but I understand. So let's move to category 2. Category 2 is monitoring, data management, and technical studies. As part of ongoing reporting that is done under that 2019 fee, the contractor consultant that is used by the 3 GSAs to do that annual reporting collects data and says, well, what's the latest data? And they also, in that 2019 fee, it pays for some of that data collection, but we have a lot of data gaps. There are places where we only have one well in large expanses. So we're using one well to try and understand what's going on. So there's identification in the groundwater sustainability plan about filling those data gaps. That means drilling new monitoring wells and equipping those monitoring wells. So we have more data to help demonstrate we're doing the right things, stay out of our backyard. And so the idea of doing additional data gaps is one of the items here. The other part is the alternative remote sensing service. If the GSA decides, based on a lot of input from everybody, that the current use of the tool called OpenET, which is being used by the groundwater accounting platform, and again, we can go into details there. You as an individual can use an alternative remote sensing service. We can accept that. You can use meters. We can accept that. But if collectively we want to switch away from OpenET, which is free, we will have to start paying as the GSA for everybody. So there's a line item that in the event we need to actually collect money for that, we've set it up so we can. It doesn't mean we need to, doesn't mean we have to. It might be something out in the future, but if we don't plan for it now with this fee structure, the GSA would have to come back and start asking for dollars again. So we're trying to cover all sorts of things that are anticipatory over the next several years and into the future. So that's the alternative remote sensing. The technical support and studies, same sort of thing. There's ongoing need to evaluate this issue or that issue, look at subsidence, look at interconnected surface waters, understand how groundwater levels are replying in different areas, and can we make modifications by sustainability zone. Those are things that we'll need to continue to support with additional studies and funds over time. So you have space there. Whether you get to a point where you don't need it, great. If we think about category 1, that's going to get an executive director and staff, you don't need to hire my firm. So we're under technical studies and support. So you can remove that because you're funding it over in category 1 with somebody internal. So if we start seeing, we can understand some of that when we look at all these combined, but you can see how we have to ask for the max, but we may not need the max in each one of these categories as we continue to adjust and expand and mature as a GSA. So if we put numbers to here, there's about $840,000 max annual budget. Let's go into category 3. Category 3 is domestic well mitigation program implementation. The 3 GSAs, well, let me start back with one of the reasons our GSP got kicked back by the state is we did not address domestic wells and the potential for domestic wells going dry appropriately. So they asked all the GSPs in our basin, the GSAs in our basin, figure that out. So we got with MSGSA and Turner Island, and the 3 GSAs created a domestic well mitigation policy that allows and covers for the GSAs and potential in this basin. The groundwater levels may continue to decline before they come back up to our thresholds that we had stated that we'd get to by 2040. If that's the case, people can say, well, hey, you dewatered my well. I have an opportunity for you to now fund my replacement domestic well. So there's a whole program that got written and established for that, and it includes emergency supply assistance. So a well goes dry, there's bottled water, maybe a tanked program. You may have read about some of these things. They've been happening up and down the valley a lot. Madera and even further south has had a lot of these issues and challenges. Luckily, our area has not had a lot in numbers wise compared to further south. So that's helpful for the dollar amounts we have to generate. Domestic well mitigation administration. There is a process. Somebody says, my well went dry. Well, did it go dry because you just haven't taken care of it and it's failed and everything's dropped? Or is it because the groundwater dropped underneath and it went dry? The latter is going to have to be looked at and investigated and see if you qualify. Well, somebody's got to deal with that administratively. The 3 GSAs have decided that third parties may be best. And there's some entities that third parties may be best for some of this activity. They've been helping the county historically, Community Water Center, self-help enterprises. And there's been others around the valley that have been helping, and they often get state funding too, but they may not get state funding. That's always bouncing around. So again, we need a category to be able to cover that. Then the final one, long-term solutions in the domestic well mitigation plan. If you have a qualifying dry domestic well, the GSAs collectively will pay $30,000 per replacement well to get you a new well drilled deeper. It's got to be deep enough that it's not going to go dry again. You don't get multiple bites at the apple. So there was a dollar amount put in. You estimate that with what kind of dry well conditions we might have. We try and put numbers in there so that we have the budget to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're the headline. And if you recall back in 14-15 down in Madera, actually it was in Porterville, East Porterville, tons of newspaper articles. It was national news items. It was on the nightly news about people losing their wells because of farmers overdrafting. That's not the press we want. So let's address it through programs. Hopefully we don't get there. That's what we're trying to make sure that we're addressing. This category, again, these monies cannot move between categories. This category is a little over 700,000. So let's talk about eligible parcels subject to the fee. It may be a little hard to see on that screen. It's in your slides. You see a kind of a teal, light blue outline. It's almost a donut around this basin. The external boundaries are the Merced subbasin. You see a lot of space in the middle. That's MSGSA for the most part. That's the cities and Merced Irrigation District. And then Does this show up here, my mouse? No, yes, maybe not. Okay. Turner Island is kind of along that western boundary, about halfway. You see a little keystone that kind of comes out. That's the Turner Island area. Everything that's in green is what we call an eligible acre that's able to receive an allocation under the rules of the allocation. Those allocations are dependent on the rules and may vary by the type of the property, but they are eligible parcels. Oops. Let me go back and stay on that one here for a minute. So currently, there are 186,315 eligible acres to receive a groundwater allocation. As we noted, that eligible parcel list is included in Appendix A to the GSA, to the engineer's report, which is found on the GSA's website. It's an appendix attached to the engineer's report. So if you scroll to the end of the engineer's report, you'll see pages and pages of APNs. That 186 reflects some additions, opt-in lands, and other adjustments for a variety of parcels that were utilizing the allocation rule, which went into effect in January, but had opportunities to start enrolling and opting in over the last year. So 186, 315. That may adjust a little bit as some little tweaks here and there are occurring, but generally that's about the acres that we're working with. That is when we were originally doing the sustainable yield number and the calculations that the models were using by the company that was doing all the broad modeling across this whole basin was about 170,000 acres. So there's been about 16,000 acres that have opted in some way that are part of this process now. So when we look at these categories, add them together, the max annual budget, 2.8 million. And some change. When you divide by those 186,315 acres, it's $15.11 annual charge max per year. In comparison, we'll look at some comparisons here. That's lower than the phase 1 fee max. And we'll see that here in a moment. That 186 may change again slightly, so the actual calculation will be done in July of this year after the budgeting cycle for the GSA. GSA goes through an annual budgeting cycle every May, June, adopts a fee, and that fee goes into play for fiscal year 26-27, which starts in July 1, runs through June 27. So let's look at some historical charges against the maximum so you understand how the board tries to look at this and tries to manage on behalf of all the members that it is representing. Here we see the first, obviously the far left column is a bunch of fiscal years. The max annual fee for each of these fee types is across the top. So the 2019 fee had two categories, irrigated and unirrigated, which is really the grazing grounds, cattle guys that are in our subbasin. So there was a value that was $4 max for the irrigated and 50 cents max for the unirrigated. You can see through those fiscal years how that value changed, and they're relational. So if one goes down, the other is down, it's the same percentage, 50% or 30% of the total max for both categories. You can see how that varies across time. And it's been a max there was 3 years there where it was nearly maxed out at $3.95. And then you see last year, the one that's currently was on the last set of bills was $1.04 out of $4. So about 25% of the max, and same on the unirrigated side. This year's number will be developed and determined by the board in May and June at their board meeting based on budgets of anticipated costs for the things that are funded in that program and what the budgets are they're carrying forward into this next fiscal year. So there may be monies collected previously, they're still available. Those will be used to establish that rate. The phase 1 fee, that became first imposed in 2020, for fiscal year 2022-23. It was adopted in June of 2022. It had a max of $24.94 for the irrigated lands, and it was only charged to the irrigated land. So anybody that was grazing was not charged this. It separately had an phase 1 fee for water rights participants in a current application that is still open and pending with the State Water Board. We're working with MID and others on that application. That fee started in fiscal year 22-23, was maxed the first year. It funded, a lot of that funding was related to a project of the voluntary land repurposing. So the GSA had adopted something several years prior. So in 21, I think it was 21, 22, a multi-phased approach to be able to give time for the allocation rules to be developed and become the new implementing mechanism. And in the meantime, was going to start some voluntary land repurposing to demonstrate to MSGSA and Turner and the state that we are taking action. Because the state was signaling to other GSAs that if you just say something but don't do anything, we're going to be concerned. So the voluntary land repurposing was a way to demonstrate a desire to be moving forward and to starting to reduce the consumptive use of groundwater so that we could become compliant and sustainable. As such, we collected monies for the fund of people that were successful in obtaining a voluntary land repurposing contract. They were taking land out of production and they were being paid to take some land out of production. We collected money. You can see how, based on those projects and their funding and how many acres came into that, how that fee changed over time. And you can see last year it was charged at $6.65 out of that 24, and zero collected on the water rights fee because it's still sitting there pending with the state. It is now expired, so it is no longer going to be a charge. Phase 2 fee now becomes the replacement for that with a max of $15.11. So if you follow that max table at the very top again, you see it is now in comparison to everything else. And it will be determined by the board how much they want to charge or need to charge this for this next fiscal year if this phase 2 fee is successful. That's a key point. If it is successful and then the board says, okay, well, now if we have a successful fee structure, we will impose a per acre fee. No more, it cannot exceed $15.11. It would be set up by each of those categories and it would be added together to say it's X. And we'll talk about that on another slide here.
When is the vote, into the vote?
The board approves the budget in June at their board meeting. Second Thursday of every month is the GSA's board meeting. Usually starts at 2:00 at the county's offices, at the county board of supervisors meeting room. In the May, they'll be talking about the budget and kind of understanding what the budget might be, what might be looking like, and then they'll be making a vote in June to adopt. One of the considerations for this phase 2 fee is how much of phase 1, because it also had categories, we'll be able to roll forward that we don't need to collect any more money for, at least not yet. One of those is domestic well mitigation. There was monies being collected. Again, that was part of demonstrating to the state progress. We will have collected $800,000 towards domestic well mitigation already in our bank account. That can roll forward. That means we don't necessarily need to collect some monies for that category 3 element based on what we're anticipating that might start coming out into, or people want to start requesting or granted mitigation for that, which would start diminishing that number. There was executive dollars collected for executive director in the phase 1 fee. There was an effort by the GSA to hire somebody. They put out offers, they put out, or the advertisements for folks to apply. And they got a couple of applications, but nothing ever actually came to fruition. So there still is no executive director. But those dollars are there, so they'll roll forward. So we don't need to collect fully for an executive director. You also don't have, if you don't have executive director, you probably aren't going to hire all your technical staff. So you don't need everybody that you might anticipate in technical staff, which was, I think, up to 4 people. You don't need them right now, so you don't need to get money year 1 or year 2, possibly even, and you'll assess that over time and how you need to collect against that. So, yeah.
Question on the fees. So where does the opt-in parcels only receiving half of an allocation versus a full allocation? The 2-part question.
So part number 1, the question is, how do the parcels that opted in, and this is your phrasing, that receive half of an allocation, and I'm not going to get the rest of your phrasing of that question right, so please state that again so I'm getting it.
The parcels receiving 16 inches of water, whereas irrigated parcels will receive 24 inches of water, but both opt-in and irrigated parcels will get consent.
Okay, so the question as kind of reframed, so hopefully it'll be simpler for me to restate your question. The irrigated acres receive 24 inches, the opt-in acres receive 13 inches, yet they're paying the same fee. Is that the question? I may have shortened it a little bit.
Opted in though.
So both of those parcels are both eligible parcels. There are also managed wetlands parcels that also have a different designation of allocation of what's available to them. The allocation to a standard irrigated land that was already irrigated and didn't opt in, they have the same 13 inches available to them right now. That's applied to every sustainable yield. Sustainability zone in the basin. There's 8 sustainability zones. The rule is set up that that 13 inches might also vary over time, depending on how much success we are seeing to achieve the minimum thresholds of groundwater levels that were set for all of those different sustainability zones. On top of that, if you were currently irrigated ground, you were given an additional pumping allowance as a transitional water supply to help you manage across time to a change. So that number goes from 11 inches, which makes up the 24, 13 plus 11, and it goes to 0 within 10 years. So next year, it's only 10 inches. The following year, it's 9. It goes on down to 0 within 10 years. So that same irrigated parcel and that opt-in parcel will both have 13 inches within 10 years, if not potentially sooner. Each of those parcels, depending on the sustainability zone they are in, may have an adjustment to their sustainable yield number, which may take some up and may take some down, depending on the situation of where they are geographically, which is dependent on better data, which is why we need to do the data gaps and fill information and better understand that. So to operate the allocation program, the 3 categories we discuss are indifferent about how you qualify within your allocation rule. It's just that you are an eligible acre to qualify for an allocation. It is not volume specific. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Part 2 of my question, going back to one of the early on comments, the domestic well mitigation program on page 33 and page 39 of the engineering report, I see a bunch of zones that do not have abandoned or well that went dry. So why are we, as zones that have not had a well with drying, paying for other zones that have had wells?
So the question was, I did it without being reminded. The question was, if I am in a sustainability zone where there has not been historic domestic dry wells, so therefore maybe using that historic as a proxy for future, why would I need to pay for domestic well mitigation if it's happening in some place that I haven't created or I'm less influential to that domestic well going dry? So again, this is one of those things where we do not have good data about the exact implications as it relates to everybody and their locations. Water moves across this basin, moves over time across this basin. MID has they influence it as much as we influence when they're pumping a lot of groundwater. So there's a lot of questions about, you can point fingers in a lot of different ways about, well, it's not me, it's them, and so therefore they should pay. We do not have any data to be able to support that kind of thing. So the GSA has set forth a budget for that category, which we hope goes away quickly, because if we're implementing the allocation program, groundwater levels come up. You can't go complain about a dry well if groundwater levels are higher than they were a few years ago. So if you weren't dry then, and we're getting higher now, you can't come in and say, I've gone dry, right? I mean, conceptually, that's the theory. So we should be seeing less as we implement the allocation. We know, however, there's hydrology hiccups that go up and down. This is a weird year right now. We got a bunch of rain, then nothing, then another bunch of rain, and now nothing in March so far. And maybe we'll truly see April showers bring May flowers. I don't know. We need more like April dumping to bring May something. I don't know what would be rhyming with that, but we need a lot. That's going to cause the years and fluctuations are going to cause more pumping potentially. and more people using their bucket sooner, which could draw things down locally. And that might happen in your area. Just because it didn't happen in the past doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. So the GSA is designing a program to provide that benefit so that the entirety of the GSA is successful, to be able to report to the state that we're implementing all the sustainability objectives that are in our GSP.
We haven't paid for one domestic well mitigation.
So the question was, I'm getting better at this. We have not, have we, I'll pose it as a question. Have we paid for a single domestic well mitigation yet? We have not. The rule that was adopted in January of this year, the domestic well mitigation rule, does allow for a look back if somebody wants to make a claim for a prior expense they incurred to drop a well that would qualify for cause under our domestic well program. So there's the potential that wells that did go dry in the past few years may have an opportunity to get funded, get a reimbursement funding. That's in the rule that was adopted by MSGSA, the GSA, our GSA, and Turner Island. So nothing's been paid out to date because it just started, but there's an opportunity somebody could file a claim on a past dry well. Maybe, I know we have several, I think I saw on one thing where are there questions online, Danielle? Because we have a few more slides, but I don't, if we're off on anybody online. Okay, so I'll repeat that question. It sounds like there was a statement made online about my operation, my agricultural operation only uses surface water from the district. So I'm assuming they are, well, shouldn't say assumptions. My guess would be that they are in Stevenson or Merced water districts who have access to some surface water. Those access, the access and quantity varies by year type. There's a lot of other elements to that. And in fact, Merced pumps groundwater on behalf of people, and it shows up as surface water, often the way they interpret it, because I get it from my district. I don't pump it at my well, but it was pumped by one of the district's wells. So that's like somebody else pumping your allocation on your behalf and delivering it to you. So without knowing the circumstances there, and almost regardless of that circumstance, the continued access to groundwater, should that surface water go away, they can turn on a well and still continue to utilize groundwater. It's being protected for their use within the rules of the allocation and how they would qualify as an eligible acre. So therefore, the source only being a surface water source is not a driver to differentiate. They're still an eligible acre. So let me go through a couple more slides here. I think we only have one more after this. This is an anticipated distribution of the phase 2 funding category over time. Priorities will shift over time. The early years are expected to reflect the budgets that might be able to pull forward and the fact that we aren't going to see some of these pieces. So some of the phase 1 fees that can come along. And so the actual charges, as we've noted, will be set by the board on each fiscal year. So in May, they'll discuss it, and in June, they'll ultimately vote on it. Those are open public meetings to attend, to provide comment and input to the board for their consideration. This graphic we see here shows on the far left bar, that is the max in each one of those categories. So those 3 color categories. The one on the bottom, orange, that's the operations with the running the groundwater accounting platform, having an executive director and staff, and some office space and grant writing. So that was that category 1, kind of a true administrative activities. Blue, category 2, that's the technical studies, the data gaps, and one other element. And then green is the domestic wells. So let's start with green. There's a max number, and you can see in kind of snapshot increments of 5 years, that green goes down and gets smaller. One would hope that goes to essentially 0, and you may just have an administrative cost every once in a while to somebody submit something, you just look at it and be able to say no, because there shouldn't be any need for domestic well mitigation if we are being successful. But green should essentially go away. Orange, the category one, the staffing and all of that carries forward money from phase one. Plus the staff does not exist right now. We'd have to get hired. So, but that might be happening in those first 5 years. So you start getting some salaries and the cost of having employments and benefits and all those elements that go along with that. And so you start adding that up and you start seeing that grow. But as that grows, you might need to diminish how much you need for category two, which is that technical studies. And also, if you put in and fill the data gaps, you don't need to put any more monitoring wells. We got them. You might have to replace a transducer, or maybe one person's well collapses, or one well location you lose access to, and you're going to have to go put in something else. But that becomes more intermittent. So you see blue shrinking, orange growing as you're starting to get to that management full operation of the GSA. So given where the board has operated in the past and how they're seeing things, you might see the fees kind of bouncing around 10 or under dollar per acre over time, split into these categories. Again, the money cannot cross categories. So what's being funded in one category is available for the things that were in that category. Key dates. Last slide. The public draft phase 2 engineers report was released by the board, approved to be released by the board as a public draft on its March 12th meeting. That triggered us to have these workshops. So we had one last Thursday out in LeGrand. We have this one here, and we have one tonight at 6 o'clock out at the Merced Elementary School, correct? And so if you want to attend that one, we're going to say the same things, but you might hear different questions. So feel free if you want to come out there. Or if you know somebody, you want to just alert them and say, hey, go out there. This particular one is the only one that's online and is being recorded. So again, the same information will be provided, so you can point people to this if you would like. At the April 9th board meeting, the board will intend to vote to adopt the engineer's report and approve the noticing and select the Proposition 218 public hearing date. The rules of Prop 218 says once you adopt a final engineer's report, you need 45 days, and you need to do this official noticing before you have a public hearing. That noticing will say the board is considering this fee. They'll have a bunch of materials in there and point you back to the website and other things, but it's considering this fee, and you have the opportunity to vote against it. And if the board receives more than 50% of the parcel owners, and if you have 4 parcels, you get 4 separate votes. If you have 1 parcel, you get 1 vote. So it's a vote per parcel on the record. We have how many parcels roughly again? There's like 1,900 parcels affected. No, it's a vote by parcel. That's the 218 rules, by a parcel owner. Remember, the allocation rule doesn't apply to anybody less than 2 acres. So if you consider that, this is really, and it's only the eligible acres that get to vote. So everybody who is participating in the allocation program, what we saw on that green map, what's in Appendix A, are the people who get to vote, and there's about 1,900 parcels. So each parcel owner, there'll be instructions there of how to operate this. You can submit a written protest, or you can show up at the hearing once that date is set, and that will likely be an evening hearing date, and it has to be 45 days from the announcement of the board and the mailings, I guess, officially. So we're attempting to mail on the 10th, which would be the Friday, but that might spill over until the Monday or Tuesday after that, just logistics, right? So whatever 45 days becomes after that, we might be at the very end of May or the first part of June. So that date has not been established officially. That would happen at the April 9th meeting if the board adopts as the engineer's report is final. So on that, right after that, the staff will mail out those 45-day hearing notices, and we'll host the hearing, and there'll be a tally to see if more than half of 1,900 roughly parcels are protesting the fee. If there is not more than a 50%, the board now has the discretion to adopt this fee. And then at its budgeting process, which just then happens right after that or about the same time, it would be setting what that fee might be for that first year. That makes sense? It's first got to kind of approve and adopt, if there's not a protest, the fee structure, and then it would set what the fiscal year 26, 27 fee would be. So that's the end of all those questions, the presentation. Let me ask if there was something in before I come in. Was there anybody else online? Any other questions online? Danielle? The question was, has this GSA received any grant funding? And if so, is there any left over? The GSA has received grant funding, both as an independent GSA, but also as part of the collective of GSAs in this basin. Several grants have been administered by MID, who has been the recipient of the grant on behalf of the basin. That has included installing new monitoring wells. That has included funding some of the GSP development and initial modeling. There's been millions of dollars in grants that this GSA has benefited from. The most recent one is something called the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, which is a Department of Conservation grant that's been granted to the MSGSA for consideration on behalf of anybody in the basin. It's not limited to just the GSA, for modifying the existing operations, the productive function on that ground, to something else. So there was a whole process that's been discussed at the GSA over the last year, probably. There's 6 or 7 projects that are being funded that are modifying. They're taking land out of its current operation and flipping it to something else. And that something else is a variety of things. One of them includes an alternative crop, low water using crop. Others are getting funded for some recharge basins. Others are putting in some habitat areas. There's a variety of things getting funded. The GSA has established that in a way to be in a very good position to obtain more grant money under that, what's called Proposition 4 that was approved last year. The budgeting for that, there's a bunch of money being earmarked for more multi-benefit land repurposing programs to support SGMA implementation. And we as a GSA are positioned well to receive more of that money, which then there'll be other opportunities to submit your individual project to be funded with that grant money. So hopefully that's a long enough winded answer to that question. Back in-house, Caitlin.
That process for landowners to submit, have them. And I haven't seen a specific date, slide, or anything. I'm wondering when the deadline is for objection.
Right. It was yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. That is, we would like to get those written comments before the 9th. I know that's not a lot of days, but this has been out as a public draft now since the 12th. The reason, because the board can then consider, and we can respond to and present that any responses to that to the board's consideration of this as a draft, or as before they adopt it as a final engineer's report. Oh, sorry, I missed that repeat of a question. The question was under AB 2247. What is the which states that if you have comments, the GSA needs to, or yeah, in this case, the GSA needs to have written comments submitted to it, and then it needs to respond to those comments as part of qualifying under that AB 2247 process. That is a new process. And you may know better. When did it actually get codified? This January or last year? So it is a new function within Prop 218 world. So we're asking for those comments to be in writing by the 9th, so the staff can consider them and to make adjustments potentially, and the board can consider that.
I saw a question, correct, it went into effect in 315.
Okay.
A question that perhaps the board or staff can provide clarity of the April 9th requires it 45 days from the date of the population notice itself for landowners to put in objections. So this can help get clarity on what that time to that line is. Everyone.
So the question was about clarity on this process and make sure that we're getting that really clear at the board meeting and or before as much as we can. We will ask legal counsel for the GSA for that clarification to make sure we're getting it correct. Yeah. Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Is this something that's gonna be done every year to reassess the fees, or is this for like the next 5 years, or not making sense of them, but
No worries. That's the question is this going to be a fee that's set, well, that's assessed each year or determined each year, or how might it change and is it going on for time? So this fee, if adopted, sets forth a new mechanism for the GSA to obtain funds to operate as the GSA in each of those categories without a sunset. How much they set that fee each year is dependent on the needs of the GSA, but it cannot exceed those max numbers. So again, this graphic is an important example illustration. It could, for reasons that are driven by the variety of drivers of GSA compliance and Sigma compliance, they may decide to charge $15 every year. But if they start having big reserves, they're going to not charge that. So this coming year, they have reserves from phase one for a couple of these categories. So that will be a consideration. They have anticipating how much do we really need, or we think we're going to hire staff or just an executive director, or what might be our thing. So here is the likely budget we would want in each of these categories for year one. Then each year, they have to make what determination under that max they want to charge each year. Does that help answer that question?
And the fees for the 2019 fee, that's gone, right? Or still keep going forward?
The question was about the 2019 fees and whether it's gone or continues forward. It is continuing forward. The phase one fee, so let me jump back. I think this slide is actually really good for this. The first two columns, this fee will continue. You see it says TBD. The board will make a determination based on where the budget sits right now associated with those categories that are funded by the 2019 as to what it would charge, would ask for an assessment per acre for this coming year. It will continue. Phase one is gone. It is now expired, sunsetted. And so phase two is a replacement, and it was written and designed that way. Phase one was a temporary to get us moving, to show compliance to the state, to show compliance to our GSA partners, while we worked on the allocation and developed a new fee structure. And so phase two is now that new fee structure.
Our tax bills, are these two fees separate?
And they are not.
Oh, let's repeat the question. The question was, are the fees showing up as separate line items on your tax bill? And the answer is they are not. They show up as one MSGSA fee, but they're calculated individually for each parcel and then added so that your number sees the total, but there is a calculation that's done independent. There's a 2019 fee applied to your acres, and there's a whatever the next fee may be that applies to your acres. So it does not show up separately on your GSA as multiple lines. It's only one MSGSA on your tax bill. Did I get that right? Cool.
So after they adopt whatever the fee might be, it's going to be the 2019 fee plus phase two.
Correct. At whatever each of those are set at. So let's take the max, because that's always the worst case.
So
The max would be $4 plus 15 is $19.11. So it's basically $20 an acre. Correct. There, you can see last year was $1 instead of $4, and there may be reason we don't need 15. So as again, I don't know, it's the board's going to consider all this, but it could be a total of $10 per acre for both combos. Again, other.
out of the Grand Apple.
So the question is, are these fees still paid out of La Grande Athlone? The 2019 fee will continue to be paid by La Grande Athlone. That's a perfect example of your tax bill just has a line item for the GSA, because there are some districts that pay the 2019 fee on behalf of their growers, and they assess you. If you are in La Grande Athlone, they assess you, they collect that, they give a check to the GSA to cover its landowners for the 2019 fee. So your portion on the tax bill would only show this new fee, and historically was only showing the phase one fee, because you were separately paying to La Grande your 2019 calculation. But La Grande and others have elected, if they want to, there can be a discussion, but they've elected right now to not be in the position to try and collect these other fees on behalf of their growers.
Okay. So if you're in the Grand Athlone district, on your property tax bill under the GSA line, it will only be phase two.
It should only be, yes, it should. I don't know how how LeGrand bills you and
I think they have their own,
on the tax bills. Do they use the tax bill?
yes.
Okay, so you have a LeGrand line and it will include the 2019 plus whatever fees they're assessing you as their operation. Then you'll have a GSA, which will be the phase two fee. Any other questions on the fee? We're happy to talk anything about the groundwater allocation framework, the GSA, the GSP, stock market. I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
There possibility, because like all this stuff has a very negative effect on landowners, right? So the way these numbers work out, we're paying you guys about $1,500 per 100 acres, right? Can we go back to the county and claw that $1,500 back because our land values dropped by 2/3 or something?
Sounds like a great discussion with the assessor. And it's not the GSA's purview.
We have an assessor workshop.
I don't want to be part of that one.
Well,
So the question was about assessor, whether you can essentially modify your tax basis on your assessed property as property values decrease. Yeah, we have suggested that
there's so much money you guys can get out.
we have suggested that growers, when they're making changes or they're doing something, they might be opting their ground out. And if so, they should maybe go talk to the assessor about reassessment their property. I don't know the assessor's process. They take time. There's a process. The GSA does not interact with the assessor. The only thing we're using, well, I shouldn't say interact. They use the assessor for the finance to collect monies and to be a banker. And beyond that, the GSA does not
I
interact.
got you. No, I got you. I can comment on that.
Sure. There's a comment in the room on this question.
What's the property tax here at certain times of the year or once a year, whatever, it's a deadline to, there's actually a form you can go online or talk to the assessor and then submit the request to property taxes. And they might accept it sometimes otherwise you can show that your income went down or just based on market price. There's no question the recent sales are down, 30-40% of value. So if you have an almond orchard that was previously appraised at 35,000 an acre, it's not worth that today. So you can go in and have them readjusted.
So just as a quick recap for people online, there was a comment from a gentleman in the room saying that the assessor has a process to request adjusting your property tax basis, which again is separate than the GSA's taxing. We're just using the mechanism of the property tax bill as our way to collect. Otherwise, the GSA will have to have its own accountant staff and start sending bills out separately, which it could down the road. It'd be like getting a bill from MID, right? You get a bill from the GSA.
I'm gonna talk to our bank. Keep it up there. Wow.
So any other questions on the fee or yes, back in the back.
We have a relatively small acres, like 73 acres. Some of it's riparian, some of it's, your California. How are they allotting for all the land of irrigatable that you've irrigated in their year?
So there's a question in the audience about the allocation rules and how they apply to certain parcels. And so your question was your parcel, about 75 acres, has multiple activities happening on it between irrigation, repairing ground, some other things. If it is all one assessed parcel, right? It is all one parcel within all that. I see one head shaking no, the other head shaking yes. So
We have 5.
so the 75 acres is 5 parcels.
Yeah.
Okay. So if the parcel originally was designated by the assessor as irrigated, so it's labeled as irrigated, are all 5 of those irrigated? Okay. So that's a starting point. So they are all automatically eligible in the allocation program. You can opt some of those out if you don't irrigate those and you don't want those to be participating. but any acre you opt out no longer has an allocation accessible. Currently, all 5 parcels have an allocation, and you can combine those as one account. So one kind of farming operation, and use the allocation across that property. There are tools in the groundwater accounting platform to create an inactive area of riparian if you're worried about your riparian. If you're not using a meter and you're relying on remote sensing and you're worried that riparian vegetation is going to send too high of a signal that is greater than what's credited for rainfall each year, and you're worried about that, you can actually crop that land out in the groundwater allocation platform. You can make that inactive as a riparian. If you fallow ground for a year, each year you could actually mark that. But soon. The intent is we're discussing that. It hasn't been enacted. My apologies. So the riparian opt-out is underway. We're putting that process in place. There is if you're fallowing ground for a year, for whatever agronomic purposes, maybe you pulled trees out, maybe you're just resting the ground for something, you can currently mark it as inactive. You'll still get the allocation associated with that field, but you won't get a risk of an over count on the remote sensing if that is a risk. It's not necessarily, and it's continuing to get better, but there are some variances. I hope that answered your question. We're happy to talk more details one-on-one afterwards.
I got one question that's pertinent to all that. Say we have a drought like 14, 15, 16, and like LeGrand, all that area, there's no MID water. So everyone's, what's going to happen if we have, say, a 5-year drought in Merced area? I mean, those guys have good water up in, northern Merced, but all of a sudden wells are going dry everywhere. Is there going to be are they going to revisit GSA and say, well, you can only pump an acre foot everything's hypothetical of giving us fees, but then there's the real probability of a drought too. We had one not too long ago,
So there's a question about how we're going to address drought. I'm trying to restate it here, and whether that affects what's going to happen and how pumping is going to occur. So this, holding up here, this is the groundwater allocation rules. Have you read or seen these? Okay. And I'm not trying to call you out here. There's a lot of details laid out in this document to try and address that. So we've set an allocation that's sustainable. It's essentially 13 inches for every acre. Then there's additional water that if you're currently farming between now and the next 10 years to try and get you down to 13 inches. So if we hit a drought and everybody's still going full bore, the other part is we gave you a 5-year bucket, as she noted, to use. If you use it in the first 2 years and you're still going full bore, wall to wall growing, using more than the allocation, you're going to start hitting significant fines from the GSA. The intent of all of that is designed to start reducing the consumptive use. And several people that have been involved in our discussions over the last several years creating all this recognize this GSA approximately consumes, and that's the water going up to the atmosphere, about 400,000 acre feet of water a year. We have to drop about 150,000 of that and get down to about 250 to be sustainable, over 180,000 acres. So there's a lot of overdraft that's occurring that's going to have to change. That's going to have adverse effects. The GSA has tried to design a program to help manage that across time and to adjust. But if everybody says, I'm not going to do a thing, I'm going to keep going hard, this GSA is going to fail, and the state will come in because it says you are not achieving the objectives you set forth. And you have to report to the state every year, and every 5 years you have to update your GSP with your partners. Not only will the state probably take notice, MSGSA or Merced ID will start to take notice and be like, you're pulling everybody else down. We're going to start coming down on you in some manner. And the early conversations started in those directions. We have achieved a lot of great partnership with MID over time. There's a lot of growers who work in both.
Yeah, but the point I'm making here is not just the people who are in the white areas. It's MID. Say they're not allocated any water and they're pumping. But you're gonna that 150,000 acre feet you're supposed to drop will go right out the window because everyone's pumping at that point.
Right. If MID,
It might be an executive director job a little bit right here.
Yeah.
so there was a question of, well, if MID also keeps pumping and they don't have the surface water to make up and they don't have a true allocation in place like the white area grounds do, what starts to happen? It kind of negates the issue. We have the way we have set this up would be that our GSA is now calling them out on that fact. And we're saying you are causing the problems. We are pointing it out to the state. We may get, if we go to the state at any point in time, they recognize the white areas are the good actors and MID is the problem. It is all getting set up in those positions to try and manage together. So that's why MID and the GSA are working hand in hand to recognize these things are challenges. We haven't answered everything, but we're trying not to go head to head and end up suing each other because that doesn't help any of us.
Yeah, no, I think
But your hypotheticals are, they're possible. You're right.
But the GSA only administers and works on demand. They don't do any supply,
Now
supply ever. We never got them to not supply ever.
this GSA has chosen not to be trying to obtain supply to deliver. It will support efforts like it supported the water rights. It can support some other opportunities like through the MLRP program, it's supporting putting in some recharge basins, but it's not trying to go hold any water assets and deal with that because that just adds more layers of complexity. So it is, and you may hear this in other GSAs up and down the valley. They have access to water, but they have infrastructure to deliver it and to try and share it around. There's no infrastructure to deliver surface water without a lot of investment into the white area. You see a big donut there, so who gets the water? So now you got kind of locales that are going to deal with that. So it's better. LeGrand Athlone takes that on. That Sandy Mush takes that on. That Merced Stevenson take on their surface water operations and try and manage. The GSA did not want to be that, and they are focused on demand and reducing the demand for groundwater.
yeah.
There's a loaded question, I think, that said, what can be done about, what was the stopping? Oh, so what can be done about sending water from up north to Southern California? That's a loaded question, and I think we'll leave that for now. There's a lot of issues embedded in those things. Our best bet here is to work closely with MID. They have extra water in some years. Let's look at that as opportunities for folks that are connected or are close to be able to take that water as out-of-district water in certain years. And then also take advantage of opportunities when some of the streams run really hard and there's a chance to be able to pull water, even if it's for 2 or 3 weeks, and get that in and recharge. The allocation program is set up with credits that you can get for recharge. Recognition if you have a surface water source, it says, great, we're not going to take out of your groundwater bucket because you had these other things you're using first. So you're preserving that groundwater bucket. So we have all those things built in. It just is circumstantial now for each grower. I think that will end our phase 2 webinar at this point. Lacey, do you want to close out with anything?
Just let them know that it'll posted on the GSA.
Okay, this recording will be posted on the GSA's website in the next day or two, and the slides. And we'll shut this down, but we're also still around if anybody wants to have other questions and discussions about any of the GSA's activities. And if you really want to go through this again, feel free to join us at 6 o'clock out at the McQuinn Elementary School. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody online.
Thank you for the plan.